Alright, so to get started, we're just going to use our pop-up color paints. I am using French blue and I'm just going to base coat the tumbler. If you typically sand your cups, now would be a time to do so. I just wipe mine down with alcohol and give it a good wipe before I start painting. So you want to make sure you paint over the entire cup. And you want to work quickly during this because we don't want the paint to dry, so you don't need a thick of a coat, but you do need to make sure that every inch of the cup is fully covered, including the handle on this particular cup, and then make sure that you get the bottom as well, and we don't want to let that paint dry. So now we're going to apply our glitter directly to this wet paint. So I'm just going to dump my glitter over the entire cup, making sure that all of these spots are covered. If you notice that in a section on the cup that your paint has dried and your glitter is not sticking, you can just simply go back in with your paintbrush, add a little dab of paint, and then apply your glitter like you would normal. Now we're just going to take our alcohol ink, make sure you shake it up beforehand, and we're just going to lightly drop it just in random spots throughout the cup. This is just going to give it an extra pop whenever we add our epoxy and mica over this. So it really doesn't matter which pattern you do this in. Once we've let our alcohol ink dry for the 24 hours, now I'm going to mix up 15 milliliters each part A and B epoxy. I am using Fast Set by Counterculture, and then we're going to mix a little bit of the mica powder into the epoxy. Now for this step here, I used a little more mica than I would have liked, so I would recommend just going a little bit lighter on the mica powder. You only need a small amount because this particular mica that is included in your crate is kind of overpowering, so it does cover a lot of that glitter and the inks as well, so a little will go a long way here. So we're just going to spread that epoxy all over the entire tumbler, and then we're going to let that cure. So for the first part of the topper here, my video skipped over this part of the recording, so all I did was mix up equal parts of my Culture Sculpt, and then I just randomly placed that on my topper and kind of formed everything together to form that mountain shape. So now all I'm doing is I am using UV resin and I'm using the Sterling Snow, and then I'm just going to go over the entire top of this. You can also use whichever resin you'd like for this part, it does not have to be the UV resin. So whichever resin you're using, you just want to make sure that you allow the proper cure time for this. Now we're going to make our trees for the topper. So I'm going to start by mixing up my Culture Sculpt again, and I'm just going to mix equal parts and then knead that together until it is one color. You don't want to see any streaks of the yellowish color in your Culture Sculpt. You want to make sure that it is fully mixed. So to start, I'm going to just flatten out a small piece of the Culture Sculpt mix, and then I'm going to make a little stem just by pushing the two sides together and pushing it upwards. And then for my tree base, all that I'm going to do is use a toothpick and then cut down into a triangle and cut off those excess edges. My trees ended up turning out a little bigger than I would have liked, so I would recommend for this step here starting smaller, and then if you don't like, if they're too small, you can always reform them as long as it's before the culture sculpt has cured, and then make them a little bit bigger as necessary. I had a little extra culture sculpt, so instead of wasting it, I just decided to split it up and roll it into teeny tiny little balls to make for a snowman later on. Once your culture sculpt is dry, which typically takes about 4 to 5 hours, we're just going to pick off any of the excess pieces here. You can use an X-Acto knife and just trim those off. It should be super flaky, so it should be really easy to remove. I'm going to start by using the same pop of color paint, and I'm just going to brush it over the front and the back and the sides of the tree. This paint doesn't have to be perfect because we are about to go over it again with alcohol ink, so just make sure that you get a thin coat on the front and the back covering the full tree. Once you've got all of your trees painted, you just want to give it about 15 to 20 minutes for that to dry. So once your paint is dry, now I'm going to take the alcohol ink and I'm just going to add a small little dab onto this makeup sponge, and I'm just going to dab it over the entire tree, including the back. Once they're fully covered, you just want to let that dry for about 1 to 2 hours. So to adhere my trees, I am going to be using UV resin because I can just add my dab of UV resin to the bottom of the tree and then hold that in place, and then it'll cure instantly so I don't have to worry about them falling over. So I'm just going to do the same thing with all of the trees. You can place them where you'd like. Just make sure that when you're doing this step that you are holding them in place while you're letting them cure so they don't tip over. So for my little snowman, I just took 3 separate size of the Culture Sculpt little balls that I rolled together, and these I did not paint, I did leave them white. So same thing, I'm using my UV resin to adhere them all together. So once you've got everything in place and all secured, you can go over it again. I'm still using UV resin just to make sure that everything isn't going to come off and that it is fully attached. So just go ahead and go over it again, make sure that it's cured, and then now we're ready to fully cover our trees. So for this step, again, you can use any resin you'd like. I am still using UV resin just because it cures so quickly, and this shine is still the same finish as I would get with any other resin. So I'm just covering the front and the backs of the trees, and I'm not going to do it all at once. I'm just going to do it one tree at a time. Once you've got them all fully covered, you just want to make sure that you allow the proper cure time for them. Once your epoxy is cured on your tumbler, now we're going to add our transfers. So you'll have two beautiful sheets of transfers. You can choose whichever ones you'd like, or you can follow along with the pattern that I am doing here. So to start, we're just going to trim around our designs that we want to put on our tumbler, and you can cut off that excess space. It won't necessarily matter if you leave too much, but you just want to make sure that you trim around the edges. Once you have them cut out how you like, now we're going to just peel the backing back. Start with one design at a time. Make sure that you don't touch the actual back of the design. You can hold it by the edges where it isn't sticky. That way you don't have to worry about the design trying to transfer off onto your hands. Once you have your design in place, you don't want to try and pick it up and peel it to move it. It is kind of stuck in place, so make sure that you line it up how you want first, and then you're going to use that little wooden stick, and then you're just going to essentially rub the design onto the cup. You want to make sure that you have all of the edges fully rubbed, and then you can peel that backing back slowly, just making sure that it has transferred. So we're just going to do the same exact thing that we did previously with our transfers, and you can place them wherever you like on the cup. For this step here, under the handle was pretty easy because of the way that it was cut out, so I didn't have much of a struggle here. It's just the same thing. You just want to make sure you're using the wooden stick and then carefully and gently peel that back to make sure that your design is transferred. So the handle here was a little bit tricky to get it perfect, so what I did is I started by pushing down the top piece first. I made sure that that was transferred, and then I slowly lifted the backing up, and then I did the same down the rest of the handle. So I just did it essentially piece by piece, making sure that it was fully transferred. You also want to make sure with your transfers, once you have them pushed down, that you go smoothly over them with your hand, just to make sure that you don't have any wrinkles or air bubbles in the transfers. Once you have all of your transfers lined up how you'd like, there's no need to wait for them to dry because they are ready for epoxy. So I am just using one of our cup chucks to secure my cup to my turner, and then now I'm going to apply my epoxy. I also added a small amount of sterling snow in my final coat just to give it a little extra shimmer as well. So I mixed up 10 milliliters each part epoxy, and I am using medium viscosity here. I added a little bit of the sterling snow, and then I just applied it over the entire tumbler, and then I also make sure that I do torch the tumbler just to pop any of those micro bubbles as well. Once it's fully covered, you're just going to let that cure for the allotted cure time, and then you would just attach your topper using the magnets in our previous tutorial that will be linked below, and that's it. So here is my final result. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe to our craft crates every month so you don't miss out, and I can't wait to see what you create.